I had boarded the morning flight out of Denver with my carry-on tucked neatly under the seat, a novel I never opened, and the kind of silence that settles when you know you're stepping back into a room where every eye has already made its judgment. The flight itself was uneventful, 2 hours of cloud and coffee, but my mind kept circling the same question. Why had I said yes to this invitation? My brother-in-law's birthday in Dallas wasn't exactly on my list of priorities, and yet there I was, 32, successful in my work, and still the odd one out in my family. I had told myself I came alone not because I had no one, but because I needed to stand tall without anyone shielding me. I'd sat across from investors who questioned my worth. I'd defended projects in rooms filled with men twice my age. But nothing weighed heavier than walking into a family event where your absence of a ring or partner seemed more scandalous than any failure in life. Maya Angelou once wrote, "The ache for home lives in all of us." I understood that ache all too well, though my version always came with splinters. By the time the plane landed and I stepped into the Texas air, the afternoon heat wrapped around me like an unwelcome coat. The driver waiting outside the airport held a cardboard sign with my last name scribbled quickly across it. On the way to the house, I watched Dallas slide by through tinted windows, sprawling neighborhoods, endless driveways, brick mansions built to look older than they were. My sister and her husband had chosen one of these estates as their fortress. The closer we got, the quieter I felt inside. When the car pulled up in front of Talitha's suburban mansion, the first thing I noticed was the valet line. Cars gleamed under the late sun. BMWs, Cadillacs, a bright red Tesla someone had clearly rented just for the evening. A small crowd clustered at the entrance, laughing too loudly, glasses of wine already in hand. This wasn't just a birthday. It was a display of status, every detail manicured for effect. I adjusted my black dress, smoothed the fabric, and walked up the steps. Almost immediately, I felt the turn of heads. Whispers didn't take long to ripple. She came alone? Still no one with her? The words weren't shouted, but they might as well have been. I let the comments pass over me like wind. Years of boardrooms had taught me how to use silence as armor. Still, silence doesn't erase the sting of knowing your very presence is the subject of debate. Inside, the mansion was all polished oak and chandeliers, every inch curated to impress. Servers in crisp white shirts carried trays of wine and hors d'oeuvres. Guests moved with a certain rhythm, laughing, clinking glasses, pausing for photos in front of a custom backdrop that displayed Talitha's initials in gold script. I walked further in, feeling the weight of every glance on me. Some relatives forced polite smiles, nodding as if to acknowledge me without actually stepping closer. Others smirked openly, the kind of smirk that said they'd been waiting to see what I would do without anyone on my arm. In that moment, I wasn't a guest. I was an intruder stepping into enemy ground. I scanned the room and spotted Marigold, my sister, radiant in a fitted blue dress, standing near her husband as if the evening belonged to them both. She caught my eye for half a second before turning back to the group around her. No wave, no gesture, just dismissal. A family friend brushed past me and muttered, "You made it," in the tone someone might use for a dentist appointment. I smiled faintly, choosing not to give them the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. My internal decision was firm. I wouldn't break in front of them. Eventually, a hostess guided me toward the banquet hall. "You're at table 9, she said, handing me a seating card. My eyes drifted to the list, names in perfect script, until mine. My name was scrawled last, barely legible, as if added in haste. When I followed her through the maze of tables, I noticed the pattern: important relatives near the stage, family friends toward the middle, acquaintances scattered neatly, and then me. She stopped near the restroom corridor, beside a side table half hidden by the buffet station. "Here you are." The chair was pressed against the wall, tucked so tightly I'd have to squeeze in. Servers passed by with trays, brushing shoulders with whoever sat there. The sound of flushing echoed faintly from the door behind me. A man at the next table leaned to his wife and whispered, not quietly enough, "That's where staff usually sits." I lowered myself into the chair, keeping my expression neutral. Inside, a small laugh threatened to break free, not out of amusement, but at the sheer predictability of it all. They don't know, I thought. that I've built more than anyone at this table ever has. I set my purse down and folded my hands. Guests avoided eye contact, choosing instead to chatter about vacations and business deals. Servers swept by, balancing plates as if I wasn't there at all. The message was clear. I was meant to blend into the background, to serve as a cautionary tale of what not to become. My mind drifted to past gatherings, Thanksgiving dinners where my seat was always at the edge, Christmas mornings where gifts for me felt like afterthoughts. I had learned to wear invisibility like a second skin, but tonight it stung differently. Childhood invisibility can be softened with hope. Adulthood invisibility is sharpened by proof. I remembered sitting at graduation ceremonies where my parents never asked about my speech, but praised Marigold's outfit. I remembered pitching a startup idea that ended up in the papers, only to have my father dismiss it as just tech talk. The ache wasn't new. It was simply clearer now, framed under chandeliers and accompanied by champagne flutes. They thought I would disappear quietly, I told myself. But they forgot one thing. I was watching. The hall erupted in laughter near the main table where Talitha raised his glass, commanding attention. I stayed seated, letting the laughter wash past me. No one asked me to join in. No one noticed if I smiled. And that was the point. As I adjusted my chair against the wall, the truth settled deep. This wasn't an accident. It was a message. The banquet hall shimmered in polished perfection, gold chandeliers hanging low, casting light across oak tables covered with monogrammed napkins and rows of gleaming silverware. The sound of glasses clinking and guests greeting each other echoed like a performance more than a gathering. Laughter bubbled up around me, but I felt the distance between myself and that sound. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, reminding myself that I had faced investors with sharper teeth than any of my relatives. And yet, the sting of invisibility here bit deeper than anything in the corporate world. A room can be filled to capacity and still leave you hollow. I thought of that as I scanned the hall, the perfect dresses, the cufflinks flashing, the practiced posture of families angling for photographs. Wealthy gatherings like this were never about comfort. They were about order. Who sat where? Who was mentioned first? Who was placed in the spotlight? And who was meant to be background noise? I thought being ignored was bad. I hadn't yet seen what erasure looked like. The MC, a man who had been one of Talitha's golfing buddies for years, tapped his glass and called for quiet. The room hushed obediently, faces tilted toward the stage. He smiled broadly, chest puffed with borrowed importance. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "tonight we celebrate a man of vision, of strength, of generosity, our very own Talitha." Applause thundered instantly, a wave of clapping that seemed rehearsed. I watched as names followed. Marigold, my sister, radiant as always, her arm looped through her husband's. Applause again, the crowd beaming. Then Roxalana, my mother, her pearls catching the light. More cheers, more smiles. Then the pause. The MC cleared his throat, shuffled his note cards, and moved on without my name. A flush crept into my neck, hot and sharp, though I kept my expression even. I sat still, listening as if this omission were natural. Around me, guests exchanged uncertain glances. "Isn't she family?" I caught a whisper from the next table. "Maybe it was just an oversight," another voice murmured. An oversight. I had heard that word too many times in my life. The forgotten invitation, the missing name on a Christmas card, the skipped introduction when colleagues came to dinner. I had learned that oversights don't repeat for 30 years. This wasn't a mistake. This was the performance of erasure. For a moment, I wondered if I had imagined my place in this bloodline. I pressed my palms lightly against my knees, grounding myself. "Never let them see you sweat," I repeated silently, a mantra I had carried from boardrooms into living rooms. A waiter passed by with a tray of water, and I took a glass, holding it steady even as my insides churned. I lifted it slowly, sipping as if nothing had happened. A faint smile crossed my lips, not out of joy, but out of discipline. If they wanted to strip me away, I would dress the silence with dignity. "Sometimes silence is the best thunder," I recalled an old saying, and tonight I would let my calmness be louder than their omission. Still, the irony carved deep. My name carried weight in circles that mattered, in conferences where contracts turned on a single sentence of mine. Yet here, in a room filled with my blood, my name had no space. As the introductions ended, I caught voices behind me, the kind spoken just loud enough to slice, soft enough to deny later. We only keep her around so she doesn't embarrass the family. The words landed like a stone dropped in still water. I stared at the tablecloth in front of me, every fiber in my being wanting to react. But instead, I traced the rim of my glass, my breath even. Another whisper followed, crueler for its calculation. She's too independent. She'll never belong. My chest tightened, but my face remained neutral. They had crafted this narrative carefully, stitching it over decades. Sophrona, the one who didn't fit. Sophrona, the cautionary tale. They thought these whispers were invisible daggers. They didn't realize I had been building shields all my life. I remembered childhood dinners where my questions were silenced with a glance. "Don't upset your sister's moment," my mother would hiss. Those echoes came back now, wrapping around me in the polished glow of the ballroom. Inside, I responded with the only truth I knew. I built belonging brick by brick. They just never came to see it. My hand brushed against the place card that carried my name, scribbled in haste, half forgotten. The evidence was everywhere. The seat by the restroom, the missing mention, the whispers dressed as jokes. Each detail was a thread, and together they formed a tapestry of deliberate exclusion. I leaned back in my chair, spine straight, expression calm. They thought I'd swallow this. They thought my silence meant surrender. But my silence wasn't weakness. It was evidence. Every omission tonight was proof, and proof was something I had always known how to use. The hall roared again with laughter from Talitha's table, as though nothing had been said, nothing had been done. But the laughter no longer held weight against me. I let it roll past, my focus narrowing on the truth forming inside me. And when I heard my own family say I was only kept to avoid shame, I knew the real shame wasn't mine. It was theirs. I stayed in my chair, pushed against the wall, my glass of water untouched in front of me. The laughter near the main table rose and fell in waves, like a tide I was not meant to swim in. I could hear the clinking of silverware against china, the rustle of napkins folded and refolded, the casual chatter of guests who felt perfectly at home in a room that was designed for them. And then my eyes shifted upward, drawn by the glow of a projector casting a slideshow across the far wall. Family photos flickered one after another. Birthdays, vacations, reunions. People leaned toward one another, pointing and laughing at familiar faces frozen in time. At first, I let myself drift with it, watching the decades roll by on screen. But then I noticed the absences. My absences. There were pictures where I should have been standing next to my parents, where I remembered holding a sparkler on the 4th of July, or cutting into a birthday cake. Yet on the screen, I wasn't there. In some images, I was shoved to the far edge, almost cut out of the frame. In others, it looked as though I had never been present at all. My chest tightened as I whispered inwardly, "When absence repeats, it's not a mistake, it's design." The images turned into a mirror of everything I had been feeling all evening. Erased name, forgotten seat, now vanished memories. And with each photograph, the room felt colder. As I stared at those pictures, my mind slipped back to earlier years, moments when silence had been louder than any insult. I remembered one evening when I was 10, Marigold, all ribbons and blonde hair, had leaned across the dinner table and said in front of relatives, "Sophrona's so weird. She takes apart microwaves for fun." The table erupted in laughter, not at her wit, but at my expense. I had flushed red, staring at my plate. Instead of correcting her, my mother pressed her hand down firmly on mine and whispered, "Don't make a scene. Let your sister have her moment." And there it was, silence handed to me like punishment, while cruelty was rewarded with approval. My father had added to it, with his calm dismissal. "It's not worth starting an argument." His voice then carried the same tone I heard all my life whenever I tried to defend myself. "Don't cause trouble. Don't upset the picture." Years later, the details changed, but the pattern remained. At Thanksgiving, when Marigold mocked my career, calling it nerdy coding stuff, my father chuckled along. When my mother's friends asked about children, she quickly switched topics rather than defend my choice to live differently. Their silence wasn't neutral, it was verdict. I remembered a quote I'd once read. "The hottest places in hell are reserved for those who, in times of great moral crisis, maintain their neutrality." Dante may not have been thinking of family dinners, but he might as well have been. The betrayal of silence cut deeper than any insult. The slideshow kept rolling, pulling me back into the present. Now it had moved to my teen years. A reunion photo appeared, a wide shot of cousins and uncles and aunts all standing on a sunny lawn. My father at the center, Marigold by his side, my mother leaning in. And I remembered that day vividly. I had stood right next to my father, shoulder brushing his arm. But the projection showed something else. I wasn't there. Cropped out. It felt like a punch straight to the gut. I leaned forward slightly, blinking as if clarity would bring me back into the frame. But no, someone had deliberately cut me from the image. Guests kept laughing at the nostalgia. One relative at the next table leaned to another and whispered, "Funny how she's never in the pictures." The other chuckled softly. I swallowed, forcing my breath to stay even. I wanted to scream. I was always there. They just never wanted me seen. But I said nothing. My silence was the only rope holding me steady. Inside, though, my thoughts sharpened. Technology doesn't erase people. People erase people. Someone had made the choice to slice me out, to recraft the memory as if I hadn't existed. And that cut deeper than forgetting. It was rewriting history with deliberate hands. I let my eyes travel back across the room. Marigold was laughing, her perfect posture unshaken, Talitha's arm around her waist. My mother looked away quickly when she noticed me staring, her smile tightening as if she had been caught. I pieced it together like evidence at a trial. The missing mention of my name, the seat by the restroom, the whispers, now the cropped photo. Each piece was a thread, weaving into a tapestry of exclusion. This wasn't accidental neglect. This was systematic erasure. I straightened in my chair, spine stiff, expression calm. My inner resolve began to form, quiet but immovable. If they insist on erasing me, then I'll make sure they remember what they erased. I thought of an American proverb I had heard once. What you allow is what will continue. I had allowed silence to define me at family gatherings for decades. But tonight, every detail was becoming evidence. And evidence is meant to be used. The laughter at the main table swelled again as Talitha boasted about a business deal. He leaned back, commanding attention with ease. Guests hung on his every word, the sound of their cheer filling the hall. I sat quietly, but inside something shifted. This night wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about collecting proof. Every omission, every whisper, every cropped photo was fuel. And fuel, when gathered long enough, becomes fire. Watching myself vanish from the family's story, I realized they hadn't just forgotten me. They had chosen to delete me. The images on the projector faded into silence, but the laughter from the front tables swelled like nothing had shifted. I sat back, forcing my shoulders to relax against the chair even as my chest tightened with a kind of recognition I wished I didn't have. It wasn't only that I'd been erased from the slideshow. It was that Marigold was standing front and center in every picture, smiling as though the spotlight had been stitched into her skin. The laughter at the main table rang louder than before, sharper in contrast to my own corner. Talitha leaned back comfortably, his hand resting on the stem of a wine glass, as if he were king of this small kingdom. And beside him, Marigold leaned in with just the right amount of grace, the portrait of a perfect wife. She tilted her head when he whispered something, her laugh just loud enough for those near the table to hear. I thought to myself, the louder the performance, the hollower the truth. It hit me then. This wasn't only about omission. It was about performance, and Marigold wasn't just letting it happen, she was leading it. My sister wasn't a bystander in my erasure, she was helping to conduct it. For a flicker of a moment, our eyes met across the room. She hesitated, a spark of uncertainty in her expression, as though she wondered if I would rise, if I would push back. Then she turned back to Talitha, her hand sliding over his. The gesture was clear. A choice. I froze, not because I was surprised, but because of how familiar it felt. All my life, she had chosen applause over truth, and now she was doing it again. I overheard a cousin near me whisper to his wife, "See, they're the real team in this family." The words stung, not because they were spoken, but because everyone nodded silently in agreement. Inside, my voice said, "And I was the outsider, even to my sister." The realization cut deeper than my mother's silence or my father's diversions. Parents could dismiss, parents could be blind, but a sister choosing status over blood, that was betrayal sharpened to the bone. I kept my gaze steady on her, but inside I was tracing back years, moments when she had pushed me aside to stand in the light. My high school science fair when she called me obsessive in front of relatives, laughing while everyone agreed. My graduation when she shifted attention to her new engagement ring, shining brighter than my diploma. Every time, I had convinced myself it was unintentional. Now I saw the pattern. Silence wasn't innocence. Silence was complicity. And her choice tonight sealed what I had always suspected. I whispered under my breath, too quiet for anyone to hear, "If I don't draw a line, they'll erase me until nothing remains." I steadied my breath, keeping my expression calm. A proverb surfaced in my mind, something I had once read and never forgotten. Family isn't defined by last names, it's defined by loyalty and trust. Tonight, that truth landed heavier than ever. Marigold squeezed Talitha's hand again, smiling as he stood to greet another guest. She laughed, her shoulders shaking in the practiced way of someone who knew the value of perception. I whispered again, only for myself. I won't let them write me out again. I adjusted my posture, no longer pressed back against the corner as if I were shrinking into the wall. I leaned forward, straightening my spine. A small act, but one that shifted something in me. A waiter approached, balancing a tray of drinks. When he placed a glass in front of me, I noticed a faint lipstick smudge on the rim. I didn't look away. Instead, I said firmly, "Excuse me. Could I have a clean glass?" The waiter blinked, startled by my tone, then nodded quickly. "Of course, ma'am. Right away." Around me, a few heads turned. It wasn't a demand worthy of headlines, but in a room where I was expected to be invisible, even asking for a clean glass was a refusal. A refusal to stay small. I thought to myself, strength starts in small refusals. I could feel the ripple of attention, some guests whispering about how particular I was, others frowning as though I had disturbed the smoothness of the evening. But I let their discomfort sit with them. My quiet defiance unsettled them, and that was enough. The evening pressed on. The servers moved through the room, laughter rolled, but beneath it, I felt the slow rise of tension curling inside me like smoke. My anger was no longer hot. It was cool, deliberate, sharpening into resolve. I watched Talitha at the head table, standing now, glass raised. The chatter quieted, anticipation circling the room. Guests turned toward him like plants to the sun. I knew another storm was coming. And this time, I wasn't going to sit still and let it wash over me. When I saw my sister choose him over me, so publicly, so deliberately, I understood. They were drawing battle lines. The music in the banquet hall softened as the host tapped his glass and announced the part of the evening everyone had been waiting for. "It's time for gifts," he said, his tone loud and celebratory, the kind of voice people put on when they know they're guiding the room. Guests cheered, clapped, and shifted their chairs closer to the stage where a stack of beautifully wrapped boxes had been arranged like props in a play. I sat in my corner seat, the one tucked near the buffet and the hallway to the restrooms, my view angled just enough to see the mountain of presents glittering under the lights. Every box looked like it had been chosen not for meaning, but for display. Gold ribbons, glossy paper, oversized bows. My own gift, a simple package with hand-stitched wrapping I had chosen deliberately, was nowhere near the stage. I spotted it off to the side, near the bar, pushed aside like a leftover plate. I folded my hands together on my lap and thought, sometimes what people ignore says more than what they praise. Talitha strode toward the table of gifts, drawing applause just for standing. He thrived on it, basking in the spotlight like a man convinced it was his natural element. "Well, let's see what we've got here," he boomed, already tugging at the ribbon on the first package. He held up a silver watch, Rolex, of course, gleaming as if it had been polished for this very moment. Guests gasped, clapped, and called out their congratulations. He grinned, raising it to the light, slipping it on his wrist with practiced flair. Next came a bottle of wine, aged and expensive, the kind people buy less for the taste and more for the prestige. Then artwork, a framed painting Talitha declared perfect for the study, though he had never shown interest in art a day in his life. Each gift was unwrapped with exaggerated delight, each met with loud applause as if the audience were watching a performance rather than a birthday ritual. All the while, my gift sat unnoticed near the bar. A relative leaned toward another, pointing at the lone package. "Whose is that?" The other shrugged. "Probably staff." The words sank deep. I forced myself to sit straighter, though my stomach turned. They didn't just forget. They refused to let me contribute. One after another, the gifts were unwrapped. Designer cufflinks, a leather briefcase, another watch from someone else. The pile of prestige grew, and the cheers swelled. But when the table was empty, mine remained unopened. No one brought it forward. No one even looked at it. My chest tightened as I felt the old ache again, the ache of being erased, even when I had shown up with something in my hands. For the first time that night, I let my voice carry across the table. "There's still one gift unopened." The words dropped into the room like stones into water. The clapping stopped. The laughter dimmed. Faces turned toward me, some surprised, others annoyed. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the clink of a glass being set down too hard. Talitha glanced toward the bar, saw the package, and gave a laugh too quick, too forced. "Oh, must have been misplaced," he said, waving a hand as if it were nothing. Marigold leaned forward immediately, her smile stretched tight. "Don't worry," she said smoothly, her tone pitched to carry across the room. "He has enough already." There it was, the dismissal dressed in politeness. I sat very still, letting the moment stretch. My eyes moved slowly from Talitha to Marigold to the cluster of relatives watching, some embarrassed, some defensive. I thought to myself, they weren't just dismissing a gift. They were dismissing me. An old American saying floated into my mind, "If you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything." For years I had swallowed these slights, convincing myself that silence preserved peace, but silence only made space for erasure. Tonight, I couldn't let it pass. "I thought we were opening gifts," I said calmly, keeping my tone even but letting my gaze linger on the package. No one moved. The silence sharpened. A cousin whispered, "She's making a scene." I kept my face neutral, my voice steady. A scene? They've been performing against me all night. I'm just correcting the script. Finally, a waiter stepped forward awkwardly, picking up the small package and setting it on the edge of the table. Talitha glanced at it, then at me, his smile frozen. He didn't reach for it. Instead, he turned back to the crowd. "All right, let's raise a glass," he said loudly, shifting the spotlight back to himself. Guests responded instantly, lifting their drinks, eager to pivot away from the uncomfortable moment. But I didn't miss the whispers that followed, the side glances, the restless shifting in chairs. They had noticed. My refusal to be silent had been seen, and that alone unsettled them. I leaned back in my chair, my posture no longer shrinking into the wall. My humiliation had transformed into something else, something steadier. The ignored gift wasn't just a package pushed aside. It was a symbol of my erasure and my refusal to vanish quietly. I let the chatter rise again around me, the sound of glasses being lifted, of Talitha preparing to speak. But inside me, there was only calm, sharp as glass. The gift they ignored was nothing compared to the words he was about to throw like knives. The music faded into a low hum as Talitha tapped his glass with the edge of a fork. The sharp ping echoed through the hall, slicing across the chatter, pulling every pair of eyes toward the head table. It was remarkable how quickly the room shifted from laughter to silence, like soldiers snapping to attention. Guests leaned in, their smiles expectant, waiting for his words as though they carried divine weight. I felt my pulse rise, not out of fear but anticipation. I knew him. He wouldn't waste this moment. He would use it, the way he always did, not to honor but to wound. My fingers curled lightly around the stem of my glass. In business, I've faced men who played dirty, but betrayal cuts sharper when it wears your family's face. The air grew heavier, dense with a kind of anticipation that made breathing feel deliberate. I sat straight, shoulders squared, my gaze steady on Talitha. He thrived on attention, and right now, he had all of it. He raised his glass higher, his grin wide. "To family," he boomed, his voice reverberating across the room. A cheer started but died when he added, "Except those who have no place in family homes anymore." The words stung like a slap. Gasps rippled through the hall, sharp and soft, followed by an awkward pause. For a second, the chandeliers above seemed to shine colder. Marigold laughed nervously, her voice brittle. "He's just joking," she said quickly, her hand brushing his arm. But no one laughed with her. I didn't flinch, not outwardly. Inside, my chest tightened, but my face was a mask. It wasn't a joke. It was a decree, spoken not in anger, but in performance. At the next table, I heard the murmurs start. Did he really just say that? Maybe she did something wrong. The sting was real, but it sharpened into clarity. He wanted to smear me, to brand me in front of everyone. But as I looked around, I realized something. Shame wasn't sticking to me. It was sticking to him. The smirks were fewer now, replaced by unease, discomfort. I lifted my glass, deliberate and slow, and took a sip of water. No trembling, no rush. I set it down gently and met Talitha's eyes across the hall. The cruelest stage is the one where you're expected to break, so I didn't. Guests watched, expecting a reaction, perhaps a storm, but silence can be more unsettling than fury. My composure was heavier than any outburst would have been. I remembered a line I had once underlined in a book. Dignity is not about being respected, it's about refusing to be humiliated. Tonight, I lived that truth. Talitha's smirk faltered for just a fraction of a second. He moved on, turning to whisper to a friend, as though his words hadn't hung in the air like smoke, but I caught the flicker of irritation in his eyes when I refused to crumble. The conversations resumed slowly, clinking glasses trying to mask the tension. Yet I felt it, eyes still cutting toward me, whispers filling the spaces he had opened. Two in-laws leaned toward each other, close enough for me to hear, though they pretended it was private. "That's the one who doesn't belong here," one said. The other chuckled softly. "She only shows up to remind us why we pushed her out." The cruelty wasn't in the words alone, but in the precision, loud enough to slice me, quiet enough to deny. My breath caught for a beat, but then steadied. This isn't random, I thought. It's rehearsed, designed. They wanted me broken by design. I stared at the tablecloth, but my thoughts sharpened. If they wanted me silenced, they forgot who I was. I had spent years building in silence, learning that some of the greatest power comes from not reacting immediately. Tonight, silence would be my weapon. The anger that burned in me cooled into calculation. They had turned the evening into a play, casting me as the unwanted shadow. But every slight, every omission, every whisper, they were pieces of evidence, not wounds. I glanced at the unopened gift that had been brushed aside, the photos where I'd been cropped out, the name never spoken, the chair shoved by the restroom. The picture was complete. It wasn't carelessness, it was construction, a deliberate rewriting of the family's story without me in it. I straightened, my decision taking shape in my chest. If tonight was meant to erase me, it will end by engraving me into memory instead. The laughter at the head table returned as Talitha clinked his glass again, preparing for yet another toast, his confidence renewed. The spotlight was back on him, but I knew now, this wasn't his victory. The toast wasn't his victory, it was his opening mistake. The echo of Talitha's toast lingered in the air long after the forced laughter resumed. The clinking of cutlery and glasses returned, but the rhythm felt hollow, rehearsed, like an orchestra playing out of tune. I sat still, letting the weight of his words settle into the room. People smiled wider now, spoke louder, as though the noise could bury what had been said. But I knew, no one forgot who went silent first. The conversations that bloomed around me no longer carried the careless warmth of small talk. They were edged, cautious, punctuated by glances in my direction. It was as if I had become a character in a whispered story being passed along. In their eyes, I wasn't simply family anymore. I was the banned one. That label stuck to me like a shadow, and with every second that passed, it seemed to grow darker. I folded my hands on the table, reminding myself not to move too quickly, not to break the calm I had built. But beneath that calm, frustration simmered. It was the kind that grows not from a single insult, but from a pattern, layer upon layer of exclusion, until you're forced to wonder whether your very presence is a crime. The glow of phones began to light up the tables around me. Small screens illuminated faces, the way a secret candle flame might reveal hidden plots. I caught sight of one guest tilting their phone discreetly, snapping a photo in my direction. Another leaned closer, whispering, thumbs moving across a screen with speed. I shifted my gaze, pretending to sip from my glass, but my ears caught what they didn't want me to hear. She's toxic. No wonder they banned her. The words hung like smoke, acrid and deliberate. One guest showed another a phone screen. My face was on it, a candid shot of me staring down at my drink. Next to it, mocking emojis danced across the glass. The two snickered, covering their mouths as if that made the cruelty less obvious. Another voice, sharp in the quiet. What did she do? The reply came quick, rehearsed. If they won't say, it must be bad. The humiliation no longer sat within the walls of the banquet hall. It was being exported, digitized, texted, and shared in group chats I would never see. My silence was being rewritten into guilt. Every lack of defense was turned into admission. I pressed my nails lightly into my palm, grounding myself. In boardrooms, rumors die with evidence. Tonight won't be any different. I straightened in my chair, eyes calm but sharp. One by one, I began cataloging the night. The seat shoved into the shadows, my name left unsaid, the photos cropped, the gift ignored, the toast that declared my absence a fact. And now this, phones capturing me like I was a scandal unfolding live. They thought it was cruelty, but to me, it was evidence. The family's strength had always been image, reputation, but image is fragile. It fractures when pressed too hard. I thought of something John Wooden once said, character is who you are when no one is watching, reputation is who people think you are. And I knew they had reputation, I had character. Tonight, one would outlast the other. I let my eyes drift across the tables, deliberately meeting the gaze of those who whispered. One by one, they looked away. Some shifted uncomfortably, fiddling with their glasses, the weight of my stare heavier than any shouted word could have been. A server passed by, hesitant, tray half full. I caught his attention. "Excuse me," I said, loud enough for the table around me to hear. "Could you refill my drink?" The words were ordinary, almost trivial, but they were a declaration. I refused to fade. I refused to stay quiet while they painted me invisible. My voice, even in that simple request, disrupted the performance. If they wanted me erased, I thought, they should have chosen someone more willing to disappear. A cousin shifted in her chair, muttering, "She's making herself noticeable." Good, I thought. I leaned back, letting the tension wash around me, no longer a passive observer, but a presence that unsettled them. I was not the script they had written. From across the room, I noticed movement at the head table. Alethea, the CEO, whose influence stretched far beyond this mansion, was watching. Not with idle curiosity, but with sharp, measured focus. Her eyes weren't softened by the wine or the charm of the evening. They were assessing, weighing. And I wondered, what does she already know? Because while they spread lies in whispers and screens, they didn't see who was already preparing to speak louder than all of them. The room had returned to its noisy rhythm, but the noise felt brittle, ready to shatter. I kept my eyes steady, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing me falter. My seat by the shadows gave me a vantage point few noticed, and it was from here that I saw her, Alethea, the CEO, sitting near the head table. While others laughed at Talitha's crude jokes or busied themselves with gossip, she did not. She sat perfectly composed, hands folded lightly on the table, sipping her drink with the patience of someone who never wasted words. Her gaze shifted between Talitha, who thrived in his role as the star of the evening, And me, sitting alone. In silence, powerful people listen the hardest, I thought. And she was listening. Not to the laughter, not to the applause, but to the truth underneath it all. Her eyes were sharp, cutting past the glitter and performance. Suspicion flickered through me. Why is she watching so closely? The unease coiled tight in my chest. I had no idea she already knew my name. I leaned back slightly, trying not to betray my curiosity. Around us, the crowd continued their game of appearances, boasting about business, comparing cars, complimenting dresses. But Alethea didn't play. She evaluated. Why isn't she laughing? I heard someone whisper at a nearby table. Their question wasn't about me this time. It was about her, the CEO. I glanced at Alethea again. She hadn't smiled once. Leaders don't waste energy on noise. They wait for truth. And she was waiting. The anticipation built in me like pressure behind a dam. Something about her presence told me this night wasn't finished. Then it happened. Alethea pushed her chair back, rising slowly, glass in hand. The sound of her chair legs against the polished floor was enough to hush the room. Conversation stilled, laughter cut short, as though someone had drawn a curtain across the stage. She never interrupts. A man near me whispered. This must matter. Alethea lifted her glass, not toward Talitha, not toward Marigold. She raised it toward me. Gasps spread like wildfire. Heads turned, all eyes locked on me, the woman who had been erased, cropped, whispered about. I felt the weight of every stare press against me, yet for the first time all night it didn't burn. It lifted. In that instant, every whisper turned to ash. To Sophrona, Alethea said, her voice steady, carrying across the hall without effort. Some contributions don't need introduction. They change outcomes. The room froze. My chest rose and fell, steady. But inside I was stunned. I wanted to glance away, to break the tension, but I held her gaze, refusing to shrink. Talitha's face faltered, his confident grin wobbling. Marigold's hand gripped his arm too tightly, her knuckles whitening. Sophrona, my name. Spoken here, aloud, not erased, not silenced, but honored. Alethea's words settled like stones in still water, sending ripples through every guest. Whispers erupted, sharp and fast. Wait, what did she do? I thought Talitha. No, she said Sophrona. The vindication rolled through me like fire, sharp and cleansing. Alethea didn't sit back down immediately. She continued, her tone calm but firm. Years ago, her work changed how we built our systems. Without that, we would not have won the contract we celebrate tonight. Shock spread across the tables. My mind replayed her words slowly, each one like a strike of lightning. She had tied my name to victory. She had tied my contributions to their success. Talitha froze mid-smile, his glass hovering in the air, trembling, his carefully constructed facade cracked. Guests whispered louder now. That was her? I thought Talitha had... All this time? I breathed slowly, keeping my composure even as adrenaline surged through me. Inside, I thought, the truth doesn't need defense. It defends itself. Alethea finally lowered her glass and returned to her seat, unbothered by the storm she had unleashed. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was recalibration. Everyone in that hall was reevaluating me, reconsidering the narrative they had been handed. My humiliation flipped in an instant into empowerment, not through shouting, not through retaliation, but through fact. Cold, undeniable fact. I stood slightly, offering a nod. Just a small acknowledgement, nothing more. I didn't need to add to what she had said. The truth had been enough. I didn't smile, didn't bow, didn't gesture for approval. I let the quiet acknowledgement stand on its own. Sometimes the loudest victory is silence. As I sat back down, the atmosphere shifted again. The whispers softened into a heavy quiet. Guests who had avoided my gaze now found it, offering awkward smiles, forced politeness. Across the hall, Talitha's shoulders were stiff, his jaw tight. Marigold's lips moved, whispering to him, but he didn't answer. His empire of image had cracked, and everyone had seen it. And as the room recalibrated around me, I realized this night had only just begun to turn. The room was still vibrating with the impact of Alethea's toast. Conversations had resumed in fragments, but the energy was different now, fractured, recalibrated. It wasn't applause I heard in the murmurs around me, it was adjustment. People who had dismissed me an hour earlier were now whispering with a new tone, some embarrassed, others careful, like they didn't want to be caught on the wrong side of a story they no longer controlled. I sat quietly, letting the moment breathe. I didn't need to move. I could feel the eyes returning to me, one by one. Some softened in awkward recognition, others hardened with suspicion. It didn't matter. Every glance proved the balance of the night had shifted. And then there was Talitha. I watched him closely, forcing his smile to stay plastered across his face, but the tension was there. His shoulders had stiffened, his jaw tight. His hand gripped his glass too firmly, the stem trembling under the pressure of his fingers. He was rattled, though he tried to mask it. Power borrowed from lies always trembles when truth speaks. The spotlight had slipped, and he was desperate to wrench it back. He rose slowly, his chair scraping against the polished floor. The sound cut through the scattered conversations, pulling attention toward him. He lifted his glass, posture stiff but deliberate. "To family," he declared, voice louder than necessary. "And to keeping appearances." The words fell heavy, met with forced laughter. It wasn't joy. It was compliance. A few clapped, too eagerly, the sound strained. Others exchanged looks, uncertain. And then it happened. His hand shook, the glass tilted, and in a moment too quick to catch, red wine cascaded down the front of his suit. Gasps rippled across the room. Someone stifled a laugh, a sharp intake of breath that broke into a muffled chuckle. The deep crimson spread across his white shirt, bleeding like an accusation. Marigold rushed forward, her hands frantic, grabbing napkins from the table, dabbing uselessly at the stain. Her panic only magnified the humiliation. I sat still, my expression composed, though inside I felt the shift. Some stains wash away, some reveal what's been there all along. The perfect image of Talitha cracked in real time, not because of my words, not because of a confrontation, but because of his own tremor. His own fear had betrayed him. Guests exchanged glances, whispers darting like arrows. All that control, and he can't hold a glass. Did you see the way his hand shook? I let a faint smile brush my lips, not gloating, but deliberate. The silence I carried now was louder than any laughter could have been. Humiliation is loudest when it comes from silence around you. I watched as the facade of the family's control weakened. For once, the whispers were no longer about me. They were about him. He shifted uncomfortably, Marigold pressing at his suit, muttering, "It's fine, it's nothing, just a spill." But her words didn't land. The crowd wasn't buying it. And then the screens caught it. Unbeknownst to him, the cameras set up around the hall, meant to capture the grandeur of the night, had caught every second of the spill. On the massive projection behind the stage, the image looped. Talitha raising his glass, the tremor, the spill, Marigold's frantic dabbing, over and over again, red spilling down white. Laughter tried to bubble again, but this time it was uncontrolled, unpolished. Phones lit up, buzzing with notifications. I knew without needing to check. Clips were already flying through group chats, spreading faster than the wine across his suit. They tried to script me as the family's disgrace, I thought, but the stage betrayed them first. Voices sharpened. "This is going viral by tomorrow." His own party just became his undoing. Talitha's face drained of color, his composure slipping into raw humiliation. He turned, trying to block the screen, but the image looped again, relentless. His attempts to smirk now looked pitiful, his gestures stiff, every movement recorded and magnified. I sat quietly, my hands folded in my lap. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it drips, red, across a white shirt. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to raise my voice. His undoing was already playing on every screen, projected larger than life, impossible to deny. The whispers now were no longer knives aimed at me. They were chains tightening around him, and that was only the beginning of his unraveling. The laughter that had followed Talitha's spill faded into an uneasy silence. Guests tried to patch it back together with forced chuckles, but the sound was hollow, like glass rattling in a drawer. Phones buzzed all around us, clips spreading faster than he could wipe the stain from his shirt. I sat still, watching the damage take its shape. It wasn't my humiliation they were replaying now. It was his. The lie they built around me collapsed faster than a dropped glass. I could see it in the way people shifted, how they avoided meeting his eyes. He had been their star, their symbol of control, and now he was just a man in a ruined suit. Marigold clapped her hands suddenly, too loudly, the sound bouncing awkwardly off the chandeliers. "All right, let's move on," she announced, smiling with a sharpness that strained her face. Plenty more to celebrate tonight, but the damage lingered. No one followed her lead with the same energy. Some looked down at their plates, others smirked behind their hands. The air was cracked, and she couldn't smooth it over. I stayed quiet, letting the silence do its work. She found me not long after. Marigold swept toward my table with a glass of champagne in her hand, her smile painted on like armor. She leaned down, her voice honeyed, but taut. "Why didn't you tell me you knew her?" she hissed softly, the edges of her grin still wide for anyone watching. "Why did you let us look foolish?" I looked up at her, unblinking. Her words weren't about truth, they were about control. She didn't care that they had humiliated me. She cared that they had lost face. "You wanted the spotlight," I said evenly. "Now you have it." Her jaw tightened. "Don't be clever, Sofrona. This isn't about me." I folded my hands calmly on the table, my posture relaxed. Decades of practice in hostile boardrooms had taught me this composure. "Everything with you has always been about you," I said quietly, so only she could hear. For a moment, her smile faltered. "Even blood ties can strangle if you mistake them for loyalty." She straightened, her voice rising a notch, drawing in the attention of those around us. "So you've been hiding connections? Keeping secrets?" Her tone was sharp, accusing, designed to flip the story. I stood, slow and steady, my glass in my hand. "You never asked about my life," I said coldly. "Only how it compared to yours." A ripple moved through the tables as heads turned. Conversations paused. They had heard me. Marigold's eyes widened, the polished mask slipping for the first time. "You think you're better than us?" she snapped, too loudly now. "No," I replied, my voice low but clear. "I know I never needed you to define me." The silence that followed was electric. Guests murmured, whispers spreading like sparks. Her face flushed, her smile gone completely. She had overplayed her hand, and the room saw it. Truth cuts sharper than anger. Cold words freeze deeper than fire. Before she could gather herself, Alethea rose from her seat at the head table, calm, deliberate, her glass in hand. All eyes turned to her. Her voice carried with the ease of authority. "Funny how history gets rewritten," she said, her gaze sliding toward Talitha. "If it weren't for Sofrona's recommendation years ago, he would never have entered my company." The room gasped. Marigold froze. Talitha's face drained of color, his body stiffening. The foundation of his career, his image of success, was being pulled out from under him in plain view. "She vouched for him?" a guest whispered. "All this time?" another said, shaking their head. I stayed still, my breath even. I never wanted credit, but I won't carry their silence anymore. Talitha stammered, his voice breaking as he tried to speak. That's not..." But Alethea's steady tone cut over him, sharp as a gavel. "You built an empire on her name. Perhaps it's time everyone knew that." The whispers now turned into full voices, the sound of a room turning. His smirk was gone, his shoulders heavy under the weight of exposure. Marigold looked from him to me, but there was no script left to follow. I glanced toward my parents. My mother's stiff smile faltered, her pearls trembling as she shifted in her chair. My father cleared his throat, avoiding my eyes, his discomfort obvious. They could no longer defend the golden child. They could no longer pretend not to see me. They were so used to my silence, they never prepared for the echo. And in that echo, their empire of lies began to crumble. The banquet hall had changed in ways that were subtle yet undeniable. Forks clinked softly against plates, but the hum of conversation was gone. A silence stretched between tables, not the silence of superiority that I had known all my life, but the silence of unease, of fear. Relatives avoided my gaze now, as if meeting my eyes would force them to acknowledge something they could no longer deny. I looked around the room and saw Talitha and Marigold, their faces taut with effort, still trying to hold their posture. But their laughter had thinned. Their gestures no longer drew the automatic applause they were accustomed to. The air had shifted. When silence shifts sides, you realize the room has already chosen. I sat in my corner chair, posture steady, hands relaxed in my lap. No one was laughing at me anymore. No one was mocking my seat or whispering about my solitude. The whispers had turned toward them, and though no words reached my ears, I could feel their discomfort weaving through the room like smoke. For a moment, I thought no one from my family would dare come near me. Then I saw her, my mother, Roxolana, making her way through the tables with a stiffness that betrayed her nerves. She carried herself with the same grace she had always insisted upon, but her steps faltered slightly as she drew closer. She stopped beside me, her pearls trembling faintly as they caught the chandelier light. Her voice was low, almost gentle. "You look beautiful tonight. We're proud of you." I looked up at her, holding her gaze. The words I had begged to hear as a child, handed to me now like spare change. I let the silence sit before I spoke. Now, because she raised a glass? Because the room applauded? Her lips parted, then closed again. For the first time in years, she faltered, no smooth deflection at the ready. Pride that comes late is not pride, it's fear of being wrong. I leaned back in my chair, my eyes never leaving hers. She shifted uncomfortably, smoothing the fabric of her dress. The silence stretched until it was unbearable. Finally, she murmured, "We didn't realize." I cut in gently, but with steel in my voice. "You never asked." Her breath caught. She stood there for a beat longer, then stepped away, her back straighter, her chin higher, but the tremor in her shoulders betrayed her. I let her go without calling her back. The wound that had lived inside me for decades, the craving for her pride, no longer controlled me. What I wanted was never their pride. It was their honesty. I exhaled slowly, and with that breath, I closed the door on the need that had defined so much of my pain. A line from somewhere surfaced in my mind. It is better to disappoint people with the truth than to please them with a lie. Tonight, I had chosen the truth, and it had set me free in ways applause never could. As I steadied myself in that clarity, movement caught my attention. Alethea, the CEO, rose from her place at the head table and walked toward me with the unhurried grace of someone who knew every eye followed her. Her expression was composed, her smile small but genuine. She stopped at my table, glass in hand. "We should talk Monday," she said, her voice calm, yet deliberate. "There's a project you need to lead. I don't offer this lightly." The room stirred, murmurs swelling. Her words were public, undeniable, a seal of recognition that no one could erase. I felt the weight of the moment, but not with shock, only with readiness. What they denied me for decades, a stranger honored in a single sentence. I nodded, not exaggerated, not dramatic, just steady. "I'd be glad to," I replied simply. Gasps rippled, hushed voices rising again. Some guests leaned in, whispering quickly, realizing that the woman they had dismissed hours earlier was now being chosen, not by family, but by the world beyond this house. I sat straighter, my chin lifted, but I didn't need to smile or gloat. The recognition wasn't for show, it was real. It was earned. Across the hall, I saw Marigold pale, her fingers gripping Talitha's arm. He sat stiff, silent, eyes darting, no words left that could cover the collapse of his image. I turned slightly and saw my father. He shifted uncomfortably, adjusting his tie, his jaw tight. My mother had returned to her seat, her smile plastered back on, but it no longer reached her eyes. They were both caught in a storm of acknowledgement they could not undo. Their empire cracked, not with a shout, but with acknowledgement they couldn't take back. I looked down at my glass, swirling the water inside slowly, and thought, but what pride breaks can never be mended. And I was done being their glue. The banquet hall was still heavy with the weight of Alethea's revelation. People moved cautiously now, their voices hushed, forks tapping plates without rhythm, laughter gone stale. The air felt charged, like the moment before a storm broke. Guests glanced nervously between Talitha, red-faced and rigid, and me, still seated at the edge, unshaken. Truth is like fire. It doesn't need to scream, it spreads. I saw it burning already. Their whispers weren't about me anymore. They were about him. Marigold sat frozen, her polished image cracking under the strain, her hand clutching his arm too tightly. My mother stared at the tablecloth as though willing it to swallow her. My father fidgeted with his cufflinks, eyes fixed on the floor. For the first time tonight, the shame wasn't mine to carry. Talitha cleared his throat, trying to steady his voice. It was a team effort, he declared, too loudly. Success isn't built alone, we all contribute. His words stumbled, desperate. Before anyone could nod, Alethea rose again, her presence enough to silence the hall. Her tone was cool, her gaze unwavering. No, she said. You wouldn't have been in the room without her name on your resume. Gasps tore through the room, sharp and quick, the final nail. I watched Talitha's expression collapse, his grin flickering out like a candle. His empire, built on borrowed credit, was caving in under the truth. Guests murmured in shock. So he owes everything to her? All this time? I sat calmly, the vindication washing over me not as triumph, but as clarity. The empire he built on borrowed credit was collapsing under its own weight. He tried to recover, muttering something incoherent, but the sound of the crowd drowned him out. People had stopped listening to him. They were listening to the silence between us. I rose slowly from my chair, every movement deliberate. The hall turned toward me, the noise softening into breathless quiet. For once, the spotlight wasn't stolen. It was mine. I let the silence stretch until it ached, then spoke, calm but edged with steel. I wasn't banned. I walked away from a family that never saw me. The words cut through the hall, clean and final. No one dared laugh, no one whispered. She's not angry, someone murmured. She's done. I turned slightly, scanning the room, my voice steady. And tonight, I'm not the one who needs to be ashamed. The silence deepened, the weight of it pressing against every wall. A few guests nodded slowly, others clapped quietly, not with showy enthusiasm, but with sincerity. Allegiance shifted, subtle but irreversible. Marigold's face drained of color. My mother looked like she wanted to reach for me, but her hand froze midway, collapsing into her lap. My father's lips pressed thin, no words left. Talitha sat rigid, the stain of wine on his shirt blooming like a wound, his mask stripped away. That was the end of it. I gathered my coat, slipping it over my shoulders with calm precision. Each step I took through the hall was slow, deliberate. Guests parted quietly, making way without a word, their eyes avoiding mine, but their bodies yielding respect. The camera, still streaming, caught every moment of my exit, projecting it larger than life. Some victories aren't won in cheers, but in the silence that follows you out the door. I reached the doorway, pausing only for a second. Behind me, the murmur of voices began again, but softer now, fragmented. The story was no longer about my erasure. It was about their collapse. The door closed behind me, the cool Texas night rushing in to meet me. I breathed deeply, the air sharp and liberating. I came alone. I left alone. But I walked away whole, and that was the night they lost me forever, and I finally found myself.